Hello. I want to talk about a few things today, but I want to start by telling you a story. This is something that happened to me about a year before last. I think it was in the summer, and I went to Sainsbury's in West London in order to do some shopping. I was a bit short of time. It was a hot sunny day and so on. Anyway, I did my shopping and I got out and I got in the car and I got to the barrier. And I discovered that they had some system whereby you had to get your ticket stamped or you had to get a number or something in order to get out. So I wasn't that happy about it, but it was my own fault. I hadn't noticed the signs and so on. So I had to get out and had to ask the cars behind me to back up and so on. And then eventually got back to the finding another car parking space. And I went into the store and I went to customer services. Now there were two people there. There was a woman and there was a young man. When I say young, he was probably no more than about 20. And it was he who I dealt with. So I went to say, what have I got to do and so on. And he immediately started patronising me. He said, oh, you didn't see the signs, did you? Everybody else seems to see them. Talking down to me generally. And in the end, he handed me my card and he said, now you won't do that again, will you? I was so cross that I just said, oh, for fuck's sake. And he said, that's abuse. You're abusing me. That is verbal abuse. He said to the girl sat next to him, call the police. I'm being abused here. She called the police. She said to the police, we have a customer here who's verbally abusing one of our staff. Can you come, please? And at that point, I left the store and I went back and got my car a couple of hours later. Had I not left, if I'd have stayed there, the police would have turned up almost certainly. There'd have been 2 or 3 of them. A couple would have stood around watching the customers, and one of them would have written out in great detail who I was and my name and address and what I do and how often I visit the store and where did I park and how long was I there for and what actually happened. It would have taken half an hour or more, and he'd written pages and pages of notes. They'd all gone back to the police station then, and he just spent the rest of the day typing up this report, and the report would have then eventually been passed on to a sergeant or an inspector or something, and then a month later I got a letter saying they're not taking any further action, although my details will of course be on police files. And I thought, oh, this is just insane. I mean, who doesn't utter those sort of words or every day? And it reminded me of 1 or 2 other cases that I've seen recently. You've probably seen there was a guy who's been on TikTok quite a lot. He's some sort of Orthodox Christian in the UK, and somebody in his particular sect in Australia, a bishop, was arrested for some reason or other, and he objected to it and so on. And so he wrote on I think it was on Facebook, he said something like, Christians need to stand up against this sort of thing. And someone complained that this was an incitement to violence. And so this guy, he filmed the whole incident. He was visited by 2 policemen and an NHS psychiatric nurse. And he was asked why he did it and so on, and he was explained to him why somebody found it offensive and so on. And the nurse said to him, is there something you'd like to talk about? Because obviously, somebody who writes Christians need to stand up against this sort of thing is obviously needs mental help, completely and utterly crazy. And I have no idea what happened eventually about it. I presume they didn't take any further action. But there was also a case, again, I saw on social media last week about a woman who was standing outside. You've probably seen it, standing outside an abortion clinic, and she'd previously been in trouble because she'd been demonstrating there. But on this occasion, she was just standing there, and when asked by the police what you're doing, she said, "I'm just praying for aborted fetuses and so on. I'm praying silently." She wasn't saying anything. She wasn't carrying any signs. She wasn't doing anything. She just stood there, and she was issued with after a long interview, she was issued with a fixed penalty notice. And there was the case, you remember that Trudy Warner last year, who held up a sign outside the Old Bailey, I think it was, and it said, "Jurors, you have an absolute right to acquit defendants according to your conscience." That is actually a statement of fact. It's as much a statement of fact as the sky is blue. It's almost impossible to see how that can be offensive. Nonetheless, she was arrested and she went to the police station, all the rest of it, and eventually the police decided to pursue the case, and it went to the High Court. Now, the High Court involves judges, and it involves the judge, it involves barristers and clerks and all of the paraphernalia and so on. Costs absolute fortune, thousands and thousands and thousands for any case. And the judge quite rightly just threw the case out and said it was ridiculous. And at the same time, I see today that there's a backlog of 73,000 cases awaiting trial. And you have to say there's something wrong. There's something crazy here. The police are wasting so much time. I mentioned in a previous video about how one night the house opposite me was visited by 20 policemen who stayed there for about 2 hours to investigate some guy who was thought to be an illegal immigrant but wasn't. Now, Robert Peston, of ITV, who, for anyone who's watching this outside the UK, he's one of our most distinguished political journalists. He had his phone stolen the other day. It was one of these snatches. A few years ago, it was very fashionable amongst criminals to steal phones by just snatching them in the street. They come along on motorbikes and whip it out your hand and they're gone. And it hadn't been happening a lot until recently, and now it's become fashionable again, and it's happening all the time. There's a huge number of cases of phones being stolen from people in the street. Anyway, Peston had his phone stolen, and it was an iPhone, so he went straight home and he got out on his iPad and he found out where the phone was, and he got the precise address. He went on to Street View and he took a photograph of the front door of the house where this phone was. And he sent this to the police. He sent the address, the picture of the house and everything, and a full account. The police said they were not going to investigate. And when he asked them why, they said they're overwhelmed with cases like this of phone thefts, and they just don't have the time. And secondly, they were not allowed, by law, to act on GPS information. Subsequently, his phone turned up in Algeria. But you have to say, who's telling the police what to do? I've met policemen from time to time. They all seem, those I've met have all been extremely decent, nice, honest people trying to do an honest job. But, when you've got people telling you, your superiors telling you to go and investigate these ridiculous non-crimes, and yet when you're given evidence of a crime which has happened where you know exactly where the offender is, and you don't investigate because you're too busy, it's crazy. It's said, I read recently, that morale in the police is so low that up to 20% are thinking of leaving. But it's not the policemen that are at fault, it's whoever's telling them what to do. And, one of Starmer's latest pledges, or whatever it was, missions or whatever, is to employ 13,000 new policemen. Well, are they all going to be running around chasing complaints about what's been written on social media? I mean, you just wonder. It seems to me priorities are so skewed at the moment. Anyway, having got that off my chest, as far as politics is concerned this week, we've seen, whenever I criticise Starmer about anything, I lose loads and loads of subscribers. I think a lot of people think that, he's going to sort everything out, and I think it's more hope than expectation, really. But he was in Saudi Arabia this week, and he was trying to get them to invest in the UK. And I thought at the time, we need to get investment because, we've lost so much business since we left the EU. And I thought, going for foreign investment all the time, it's just selling more stuff to foreigners, because nobody, particularly the Saudis, who are pretty smart and who have access and employ some of the cleverest advisors on earth, they're not going to invest a penny without being certain they're going to get more than a penny back. And so whatever they do invest in here, if it's in businesses or infrastructure or whatever, they're going to make a lot more money than they actually invest. And it just seems to me that the whole world knows now that we're suffering. Our economy is really suffering, that we're in trouble, and that we're desperate. Everyone knows we're desperate. And you know that Trump is going to be president in a month or so. I mean, he's just going to. I mean, he and his people are just going to eat us, really, because they'll just come and buy whatever they want. I mean, it's going to be a jumble sale for them. which is frightening. And that's the situation we're in as a result of Brexit. I know people grumble that I talk about Brexit, but that's what this channel is really about. At the same time last week, we had Rachel Reeves, who went to Brussels, and a big fanfare about the fact that she's the first Chancellor to go meet all the European finance ministers since Brexit. And she went there and she's made it absolutely clear, there's no question whatsoever, was attempting to rejoin the single market customs union or to agree to free movement. Free movement, absolutely not. Not even free movement of young people on temporary terms. That's exactly the question. Despite the fact that we do have all sorts of deals with Australia, New Zealand, with Korea, with Japan, and soon with Uruguay, whereby our young people can go to those countries, and their people can come. Their young people to come to the UK, but they're non-Europeans. The thing is, we don't want any Europeans. So she made it quite clear. There's no question of any deal on youth movement. And so she's kind of gone over there and said to the EU, listen, we're not going to move our red lines on anything. We're not going to agree to anything. But what are you going to do for us in return? Because we'd like you to help make trade simpler and make it easier by doing away with some of the red tape which everybody in the world who deals with the EU has to cope with. And funnily enough, at the same time, there's I've said so many times before that for small or medium-sized businesses to export to the EU is almost impossible, simply because the customers in the EU don't want the paperwork. They don't want the hassle. Nobody in business wants hassle and paperwork. But some firms are still managing to export to the EU. But new regulations were brought in last week on 13th of December, and they're called GPSR. Now, bear in mind that 42% of our exports go to the EU. Now, this GPSR is a new system, and it also applies to Northern Ireland. So anybody from the UK exporting to the EU or to Northern Ireland must show that whatever they're exporting, this excludes food products, which are covered by different regulations, but anyway, they must show that whatever they're exporting meets certain standards and it's been tested within the EU. So anything you're exporting and selling to the EU, doesn't matter if it's on the internet, wherever it is, it has to be tested, and you have to have proof, certification that that your goods meet with European standards. And not only that, any company exporting to the EU will now have to employ someone, a responsible representative within the EU, who will check to see that your goods conform and that you've got all the certification and so on. And so that anybody now exporting to the EU will have to employ somebody to check that what they're exporting is okay. And so this is another huge obstacle to exporting to the UK. And at a time when we're not getting any new export markets, you have to wonder. And at the same time, funnily enough, the EU last week signed a deal with Mercosur. This is a market including Brazil, Argentina, and most of the countries in South America. It's a market of 700 million people, and they have a free trade deal with them now, which we would have, of course, enjoyed had we remained in the EU, but we don't. We're global Britain, and we're on our own, making our own deals, and we know how they're stacking up. We've got Australia, New Zealand, and a little deal with Japan so far. And it's now so absolutely obvious. I think anybody, and there will be people that'll be commenting on this video probably. There will be people who think that Brexit was a good idea because we took back control. Now, we can't export anything to Europe unless it totally conforms with what they tell us. It has to whatever standard they tell us we have to abide by. We've lost so much control, but of course we've got our sovereignty back. And you know that more and more people are realising this now. And it was quite interesting that Angela Rayner was on Laura Kuhn's programme last week, and she said, and I'll quote her verbatim, she said, "When we left the European Union, people were promised more money into the NHS, that living standards would be better, and the opposite has happened." So there's the Deputy Prime Minister saying Brexit's been a disaster. Boris Johnson, it's been reported on social media, has been saying to close friends that he deeply regrets having promoted Brexit. And there's still Farage, isn't there, who I think is becoming more and more ridiculous by the day, but he's got terrific support. And the funny thing about Farage is this, that he managed to persuade the farmers and the fishermen that if only we were to vote for Brexit, that they'd all be better off. And of course the farmers in particular are so much worse off. They've lost the Common Agricultural Policy grants, and they're now having to compete with cheap imports from Australia and New Zealand, so they've really lost out. And they're all up in arms about it, and particularly about the new regulations concerning the inheritance of large farms. But anyway, they were out demonstrating last week, and yet again, who's their champion? Who's the one who's supporting them all? Who's the one they're supporting? Nigel Farage, who's responsible for all the problems. And so you sometimes think you're living in a crazy place. I mean, just how stupid can we be? As I've said so many times before, outside of the EU, we're never going to recover, because all these things, and the Labour Party are doing a lot of really good things with the NHS, good things with schools and with immigration and so on. Doing lots and lots of really good things, but you need money for everything. Outside the EU, we just are so much poorer. The Cambridge Econometrics, a very respectable organisation, reckon that by 2035, that's in 10-12 years' time, we'll be £311 billion worth off, and just about all our statistics, economic statistics, will be worse than they are right now. So it's disaster, and looking at it objectively, it seems to be, as I said in the title, complete utter madness. But there it is. There you go. So if you've listened this far, thank you very much indeed. And if you haven't already subscribed, I'd appreciate it if you do so. And until next time, bye for now.